Hello there, my friends. Welcome back. Or perhaps this is your first time visiting this little peaceful corner of ours. Wherever you've come from, whatever time of day or night it might be, I'm so glad you're here with me. Tonight, as the world outside has begun to close away its bustling sounds, as the street lights cast their soft, hazy glow through your window, perhaps you're seeking a moment of quiet, an escape from the endless thoughts that circle in your mind, from those to-do lists that never quite get finished. You're looking for a story. And I have a story for you, not one filled with sword-wielding heroes, not one about empires rising and falling in the blink of an eye. Our story tonight is more intimate than that. It lives in the small, persistent headaches, in the tiny scratches on our skin, in the very air we breathe without thinking. Come with me on a journey, not in a time machine, but through the gentle power of your imagination. A journey to an era when humanity's understanding of the world, of our own bodies, was as fragile as morning mist. A time when sometimes the cure was more deadly than the snake's venom, and the healer was often the greatest danger of all. Our title tonight is When Doctors Were More Dangerous Than Disease. Sounds a bit frightening, doesn't it? But don't worry. Here, we won't judge. We'll simply observe, very gently, like turning the yellowed pages of an old book, breathing in the scent of aged paper and fading ink, to glimpse the thoughts, the fears, and yes, the hopes of those who came before us. So please, find yourself a comfortable position. Perhaps you're curled up under a warm blanket, or settled back in that favorite chair of yours. Let your body relax. Let each muscle find its rest. Close your eyes, if you'd like, and let my voice guide the way. Oh, and if you enjoy journeys like this one, a gentle thumbs up would mean the world to me. And if you subscribe, we'll have many more evenings of storytelling together. But that's for later. Right now, our story is about to begin. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. We'll start where all pain eventually leads us, to a physician's chamber from very, very long ago. In tonight's journey, we'll visit the chambers of a medieval physician, where strange theories decided matters of life and death. Then, we'll quietly step into an ordinary home to discover the silent killers hiding within everyday objects. We'll feel the atmosphere of ancient cities, where even the sky itself could carry seeds of disease. And finally, we'll witness the first flickering lights of understanding, those accidental heroes who changed the world with simple ideas that everyone mocked. Each chapter is a step through darkness toward the light we enjoy today, a light of safety, of knowledge, whose blessing we sometimes forget in our daily lives. Now then, Let us begin. Picture yourself now, walking through narrow, winding streets. The year could be 1348, or 1502, or 1650. It hardly matters. The stones beneath your feet are uneven, worn smooth by countless footsteps. The air carries the scent of wood smoke, of something cooking, and underneath it all, something else. Something you can't quite place, but that makes you pull your cloak a little tighter. You're not well. It started 3 days ago. A fever that won't break, a cough that keeps you awake. In our time, you might reach for medicine from a bottle, call a doctor who understands germs and infections. But this is not our time. This is a world where the very act of seeking help might seal your fate. The physician's house stands before you, taller than its neighbors, with diamond-paned windows that catch the firelight from within. You knock, and the heavy wooden door creaks open. The man who greets you wears long robes and carries himself with the authority of learning. But the learning he possesses, well, that's where our story truly begins. Step across that threshold with me. Feel the cold stone floor beneath your feet. Smell the mixture of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the smoke from the hearth, and that other smell, the one you hope not to investigate too closely. This is where healing was supposed to happen. This is where, more often than you might imagine, it went terribly, wonderfully wrong. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. We have all the time in the world to explore these mysteries together. There's nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do. Just listen and let the story carry you. Are you comfortable? Good. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever supports you. Feel the gentle rhythm of your breath, like waves lapping against a peaceful shore. Tonight, we'll walk through history, not as scholars or critics, but as curious observers, watching the human story unfold with all its beautiful, tragic attempts to understand and heal. The warmth of your room, the safety of your bed, the simple luxury of clean water and effective medicine, all of these are gifts that came at a cost. Tonight, we'll meet the people who paid that cost, who stumbled through darkness so that we might walk in light. So settle in, dear friend. Our first chapter is about to begin, and it starts in a place where hope and horror lived side by side, where the desire to heal met the limits of human knowledge, where good intentions could kill as surely as any plague. Welcome to the physician's chamber of centuries past. Before we step fully into that chamber, take a moment to appreciate where you are right now. The soft fabric against your skin, the clean air filling your lungs, The knowledge that if you truly fell ill tomorrow, you could seek help that would likely heal rather than harm you. These are miracles that would have seemed impossible to the people we're about to meet. They lived in a world where the human body was a mystery wrapped in superstition, where the brightest minds of their age worked with theories that were beautiful, logical, and completely wrong, where a visit to the doctor might leave you weaker than when you arrived, and where the wealthy often died from treatments that the poor, unable to afford such advanced care, survived by avoiding. Listen, do you hear that? The soft patter of rain on ancient rooftops, the distant toll of a church bell marking the hour, the creak of wooden shutters in the wind. These are the sounds that accompanied our ancestors as they faced illness without understanding, as they placed their faith in learned men who were often as lost as they were. But here's what makes their story beautiful rather than merely tragic. They never stopped trying. In the face of mystery, in the grip of plague and pain, they continued to seek answers, to offer comfort, to reach toward healing even when their reach fell short. They were us, separated only by time and knowledge, driven by the same hopes, the same fears, the same stubborn human refusal to accept suffering as inevitable. The fire crackles in the physician's hearth. The bottles on his shelves gleam in the flickering light. And somewhere in the distance, a clock marks time with its steady, comforting rhythm. The same rhythm as your heartbeat. The same rhythm that has carried humanity through every age, every discovery, every moment of darkness before the dawn. Rest now. Let the story begin to weave itself around you like a gentle blanket. We're about to meet some remarkable people, some wise, some foolish, all of them trying their best with what they knew. And sometimes, that's all any of us can do. Chapter 1. The Chamber of Sorrows. Imagine this, if you will. A winter morning, and you wake with a burning fever. Your head pounds like a blacksmith's hammer. Your throat feels like sandpaper. In our 21st century world, you might reach for a fever reducer, drink a glass of cool water, and rest. But this is not the 21st century. Your room is cold and damp. There are no pills within reach. Your only choice is to seek out the physician. You wrap yourself in the thickest clothes you can find, shivering as you make your way through muddy streets to his chambers. This is not a sterile white clinic. This is a small, dim room, heavy with the scent of dried herbs, smoke, and something else, something musty and unpleasant that you prefer not to think about too deeply. The physician, an elderly man with a gray beard and stern eyes, looks you over. He doesn't ask detailed questions about your symptoms. He doesn't use a stethoscope or take your blood pressure. Instead, he murmurs something about imbalance. Welcome to the world of the four humors theory. This was the foundation of Western medicine for nearly 2,000 years. a theory that was elegant, logical, and utterly wrong. The physician believes that your body is composed of four primary fluids, each corresponding to a season and an element. Blood, associated with air and spring. It creates a cheerful, optimistic temperament. Phlegm, associated with water and winter. It creates calmness, sometimes indifference. Yellow bile, associated with fire and summer. It creates anger, irritability. Black bile, associated with earth and autumn. It creates melancholy, sadness. Your health, according to him, is a perfect symphony of these four fluids. And illness? Illness is simply an imbalance. One fluid has become excessive. Your fever, obviously, it's caused by too much blood. Your blood has become too hot and moist. And his solution is equally obvious. A solution that will make you shudder, even in your fevered state. The physician doesn't offer you a pill. He offers you a copper bowl and a small, sharp knife. Or perhaps he opens a wooden box, and inside are dark, glistening creatures writhing about. Leeches, bloodletting. This wasn't an extreme treatment. It was the gold standard. From the poorest peasant to the most powerful king, everyone believed that drawing blood from the body was the most effective way to cool the system and restore balance. Feel that for a moment. You're already weak from fever. Your body desperately needs every resource to fight off whatever infection is ravaging you. And the cure is to make you even weaker. The physician will make a cut across the vein in your arm, usually at the elbow, and let blood flow slowly into that copper bowl. How much is enough until you feel relieved? A flowery way of saying until you start to feel dizzy and are about to faint, or those leeches will be placed on your skin. You'll feel a small pinch, then a cold, wet sensation as they begin their work. They'll drink until they're swollen and drop off naturally. People believed leeches could suck out the bad blood, leaving the good blood behind. George Washington, the first president of the United States, reportedly died partly because of this practice. When he developed a severe sore throat, doctors removed nearly 4 liters of blood from his body in less than a day. They were trying to save him, using all the knowledge of their era. But that knowledge, unfortunately, became his death sentence. You lie there, in that dim chamber, watching your own blood flow out. The fever might not subside, but dizziness sets in. The physician nods with satisfaction. Balance is being restored. He gives you some bitter herbs and tells you to go home and rest. You pay him a considerable sum and stumble out into the street, weaker than when you arrived. What a strange idea, isn't it? But try to put yourself in their position. In a world without microscopes, without any concept of bacteria or viruses, the theory of internal balance was quite appealing. It had order, its own logic. Everything could be explained. Fever was from excess blood. Sadness was from excess black bile. They weren't treating symptoms. They were treating the cause as they understood it. It was an attempt to impose order on the chaos of disease, an effort worthy of respect, even when the consequences were sometimes tragic. Now then, let that thought drift away. Imagine you've returned home, lying in your bed, and the dizziness slowly passes, carrying you into a weary sleep. But what if your problem wasn't fever? What if you had a tooth that tormented you day and night? Or a strange growth appeared on your skin? You wouldn't seek out that learned physician. You'd visit someone else entirely, someone you usually saw for a haircut and a shave. Welcome to the world of barber surgeons. That red and white striped pole you still see outside barber shops today? It's not just decoration. It's a relic from this era. The red represents blood, and the white represents bandages. It was a sign advertising, here, we don't just cut hair, we cut many other things too. In medieval and Renaissance times, medicine was clearly divided. Physicians were university trained. They read Latin books. They were theorists. They considered touching the body beneath them. So, the manual work, like tooth extraction, bone setting, draining abscesses, and even amputating limbs, was handed over to barbers. They learned through practice, not books. Picture this scene. Your tooth aches so badly you can't eat, can't sleep. You enter a busy barber shop. There's no modern dental chair, no anesthesia. You sit on an ordinary stool. The barber, hands still damp with hair from the previous customer, pulls out a set of tools that look more like a blacksmith's equipment than medical instruments. A large, crude iron clamp. He'll use one hand to hold your head firmly, and the other to use all his strength to rock and pull that tooth from your gums. There will be no painkillers, except perhaps a swig of strong liquor beforehand. The sound of cracking roots, a tearing pain that seems to split the sky, and then an empty relief as the source of agony is removed, leaving a bloody hole. Infection? Quite possible. But at least for now, the throbbing has stopped. Limb amputation was even more terrifying. If you were a soldier wounded in battle, or a farmer with gangrene from an accident, the barber surgeon would be your last hope. The patient would be held down by several strong assistants. The saw would be heated over fire, not for sterilization. They didn't know about bacteria, but to help stop bleeding when it cut through flesh. The entire procedure happened in a few short minutes. A race against the patient's shock and blood loss. Survival rates weren't high, but they were higher than doing nothing at all. These men weren't monsters. They were practitioners, people brave enough to do the dirty work that educated physicians refused. They saved many lives through their boldness and practical experience. But they also worked in a world without understanding of hygiene, anesthesia, or the complex structure of the human body. They were both saviors and executioners. Take a deep breath. Those images might be intense, but let them fade away. Think of the silence after pain, the peace when there's nothing left to fight. For many people of that time, that was all they could hope for. Be grateful for the softness of the pillow beneath your head. Grateful for the quiet in your room. No screaming, no clashing metal, just peace. And in that peace, let your body sink deeper into relaxation. If you were fortunate enough not to need knives or leeches, the physician would prescribe you medicine. But don't expect mass-produced tablets. Medicine, then, was a strange mixture of botany, alchemy, and rather unsanitary things. Many herbs actually worked. Willow bark, containing a natural form of aspirin, was used for pain and fever relief. Foxglove was used for heart problems, and it's still the foundation for some modern cardiac medications. Medieval monasteries had enormous herb gardens, where monks carefully cultivated and recorded the properties of each plant. It was a valuable treasury of botanical knowledge. But alongside that were more questionable ingredients. Balding? Try a salve made from bear fat and mouse droppings. Suffering from gout? Apply a poultice made from barley flour and goat manure to your foot. Jaundiced? Swallow 9 lice hidden in a piece of butter. And then there were the heavy metals. Mercury, lead, antimony were seen as powerful, purifying agents. They were used to treat everything from syphilis to skin problems. Mercury could actually kill the bacteria that cause syphilis, but it also slowly poisoned the patient, causing nerve damage, kidney failure, and death. The saying, "a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," became common, referring to the price paid for treatment. King Charles II of England, when dying, endured a final, horrifying treatment. Doctors made him drink concoctions containing human skull, animal bones, and nearly 60 different herbs. They pressed red-hot irons to his scalp and made him inhale ammonia from melted deer antlers. They did everything they knew to preserve the king's life, and those very efforts may have hastened his death. For ordinary people, these medicines were a gamble. They might help, might not, or might make things worse. But in desperation, people were willing to try anything. Faith sometimes was stronger than the actual medicinal properties of the drugs. What a fragile world it was. A world where the line between healing and harming was as thin as a hair. Where the most dedicated people could be the most dangerous, not because they were evil, but because they worked in the darkness of ignorance. But danger didn't only come from the physician's chamber. It also lurked in places far more familiar. It hid in your very home, in the food you ate, in the cup you drank from, and even in the powder you applied to your face. Now then, let's leave that noisy, malodorous chamber. Come with me through the quiet streets in the night, returning to a place called home. But be careful, for silent killers are waiting there. Let your breathing carry you along, slowly and peacefully. Feel your eyelids growing heavy as we walk through these ancient streets. The cobblestones beneath our feet are worn smooth by countless journeys like ours. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and something cooking in a distant kitchen. Soon we'll reach that home, that place that should be safe, should be sanctuary. But first, let yourself settle even deeper into comfort. Feel the warmth surrounding you, the gentle weight of blankets, the soft support beneath your body. In a few moments, we'll discover together how beauty itself could be deadly, how a simple meal could be a game of chance, how the very walls of a home could whisper poison into the air. But for now, just breathe, just listen, just let the story carry you forward like a gentle current in a peaceful river toward whatever truth awaits us in the shadows of the past. Let me take you deeper into that physician's mind, into the elegant complexity of his worldview. Picture him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound volumes written in Latin, their pages filled with diagrams of the human body that look more like architectural plans than anatomy. Candlelight flickers across his face as he traces his finger along ancient texts, nodding with the confidence of a man who believes he understands the fundamental machinery of life itself. The four humors weren't just a medical theory. They were a complete philosophy of human existence. Your personality, your health, your very destiny were all written in the balance of these mysterious fluids flowing through your veins. If you were naturally cheerful and optimistic, you were sanguine, dominated by blood. If you were calm and thoughtful, you were phlegmatic, governed by phlegm. Hot-tempered and ambitious, choleric, ruled by yellow bile. Melancholy and artistic, melancholic, influenced by black bile. The physician looks at you not just as a sick person, but as a walking imbalance that needs correction. He sees your flushed face and assumes your blood is too hot. He notices your restlessness and concludes your humors are in violent disagreement with each other. In his mind, he's not just treating a fever. He's restoring cosmic harmony to a miniature universe that happens to be housed in your body. The tools of his trade line the shelves around you. Glass vials filled with mysterious colored liquids, scales for weighing precise amounts of mercury and antimony, a collection of knives in various sizes, each designed for different depths of cutting. And always that wooden box of leeches, rustling softly in their damp bedding, waiting for their next assignment. When he prepares to bleed you, he does so with the solemnity of a priest performing a sacred ritual. The copper bowl is warmed by the fire first, not for your comfort, but because warm metal supposedly draws blood more effectively. He selects his blade based on your age, your build, the phase of the moon, and what he's eaten for breakfast. Every detail matters in this cosmic rebalancing act. As the blood flows, he watches its color, its consistency, its smell. Dark blood means too much black bile. Bright red blood confirms excess heat. Thick blood suggests an abundance of phlegm. He's reading your life story in those crimson drops, diagnosing not just your current illness, but your entire constitution, your past, your future, and you. You're growing paler by the minute. Your hands beginning to shake, not from fever, but from blood loss. The room starts to swim slightly around the edges. The physician nods approvingly. Good, he murmurs. The balance is returning. What he's seeing as success, your body experiences as the beginning stages of shock. Hours later, when you stumble home on unsteady legs, you'll spend days recovering not just from your original illness, but from the cure itself. Your body will work overtime to replace the blood you've lost, drawing on reserves of strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes you'll get better despite the treatment. Sometimes you won't. But the physician's confidence never wavers. If you die, it wasn't because his theory was wrong. It was because the imbalance was too severe to correct, or because you waited too long to seek help, or because the phases of the moon were particularly unfavorable that week. The distinction between physicians and barber surgeons tells us everything about how society viewed the human body. The mind was noble, worthy of university study and scholarly debate. The flesh was crude, messy, something to be handled by tradesmen who already dealt with hair and fingernails. Your barber surgeon learned his craft not from books, but from screams. He learned which cuts bled too much and which didn't bleed enough. He learned to tell by the sound whether he was cutting through healthy tissue or diseased flesh. He learned to judge how much pain a person could endure before they passed out, and exactly how much alcohol it took to make someone brave enough to let him work. His shop was a fascinating mixture of the mundane and the medical. Hair clippings swept into corners might mingle with blood-stained bandages. The same razor that gave you a clean shave in the morning might extract a tooth in the afternoon. The chair where you sat for a haircut was the same chair where someone else sat to have a growth removed from their neck. Listen to the sounds of his workplace, the snip-snip of scissors through hair, the scrape of razor against stubble, the wheeze of the bellows keeping his fire hot, the sizzle of metal being heated for cauterizing wounds. And underneath it all, if you listen carefully, you might hear softer sounds. Someone whimpering in the back room, the wet sound of a wound being cleaned, the gentle murmur of the barber surgeon trying to comfort a patient who knows that what's about to happen will hurt more than anything they've ever experienced. The amputation of a limb was surgery as warfare. Speed was everything. The faster he could cut through skin, muscle, and bone, the better the patient's chance of surviving the shock. He'd have his assistants position the patient carefully, with the diseased limb hanging over the edge of a table. One man would hold the patient's shoulders, another would pin down their torso, a third would steady the leg or arm that was about to be removed. The barber surgeon would make his cuts in a specific order, each one deeper than the last. First the skin, pulled tight and sliced in a clean circle. Then the muscle, which would spring apart and expose the white gleam of bone underneath. Finally, the bone itself, sawed through with the same tool he might use to cut firewood, the heated metal leaving the cut end sealed and hopefully less likely to bleed. The patient, conscious through all of this, would often bite down on a leather strap or a piece of wood. Some would scream until they had no voice left. Others would go silent, their minds retreating to some internal place where the pain couldn't follow. A few would die simply from the trauma, their hearts giving out before the surgery was finished. But many survived. They lived to tell stories of their barber surgeon's skill, his steady hands, his ability to work quickly and precisely while someone writhed in agony beneath his knife. They adapted to life with one leg or one arm, grateful to be alive even if they would never be whole again. And they spoke of their barber surgeon with a mixture of gratitude and terror, the way you might speak of someone who had saved your life by pushing you out of the path of a runaway horse. The preparation of medicines was an art form that combined genuine botanical knowledge with superstition, desperation, and sometimes pure theatricality. A physician's workshop was part laboratory, part kitchen, part alchemist's den. Bundles of dried herbs hung from every rafter, some familiar, like rosemary and thyme, others exotic imports from distant lands that cost more than most people earned in a year. The grinding of medicines was a daily ritual. You can almost hear it, the steady rhythm of pestle against mortar, crushing dried leaves into powder, reducing barks to fine dust, pulverizing strange minerals into substances that looked more like face powder than medication. The physician would work by candlelight in the early morning hours, when the air was believed to be purest and most conducive to healing preparations. Some of these concoctions were genuinely beneficial. Digitalis from foxglove really could regulate an irregular heartbeat. Salicin from willow bark genuinely reduced pain and inflammation. Opium from poppies provided real relief from agony, though it also created dependencies that physicians didn't understand. These successes gave credibility to everything else they tried, creating a dangerous mixture of effective medicine and harmful nonsense. But for every helpful herb, there were dozens of ingredients that ranged from useless to actively poisonous. Unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, was believed to neutralize any poison and was priced accordingly. Bezoar stones, found in the stomachs of animals, were thought to cure everything from plague to broken hearts. Ground pearls were prescribed for melancholy, under the theory that something so beautiful must surely combat sadness. The recipes themselves read like incantations from a nightmare cookbook. Take, for instance, the preparation of mummy, a medicine made from the ground-up remains of Egyptian mummies. Merchants would sell what they claimed were authentic mummy parts, though most of it was probably just dried meat from animals. Physicians would grind this into powder and prescribe it for everything from headaches to consumption, believing that the preservative power that had kept the mummies intact would transfer to their patients. Or consider the preparation of Venice treacle, a cure-all that contained over 60 ingredients, including viper's flesh, opium, and generous amounts of wine. The recipe took months to prepare properly, aging like fine wine, and was so expensive that only the wealthy could afford it. Physicians would present it as the ultimate remedy, capable of curing anything from plague to indigestion. The irony was that the alcohol probably did provide some pain relief, while the opium certainly made patients feel better temporarily, so the medicine appeared to work, even as some of its ingredients slowly poisoned the user. The heavy metals were perhaps the most insidious. Mercury, lead, and antimony were seen as powerful purifiers, capable of driving disease from the body through their inherent strength. Physicians didn't understand that these substances accumulated in the body, causing damage that built up over years of treatment. A patient might feel better after a course of mercury treatment for syphilis, not realizing that they had simply traded one form of dying for another, one that was slower, more subtle, but ultimately just as deadly. The preparation of these metallic medicines was an elaborate process. Mercury had to be purified through multiple distillations, each one requiring careful control of heat and timing. Lead was often combined with vinegar to create lead acetate, which had a sweet taste that made it easier for patients to swallow, and more dangerous, because people would sometimes seek it out for its pleasant flavor. The physicians thought they were creating precise chemical tools for healing. In reality, they were often compounding poisons with the dedication of master craftsmen. Children were frequent victims of these well-intentioned poisonings. Teething babies were given coral necklaces to wear, and coral powder to swallow, because the hardness of coral was thought to strengthen developing teeth. Feverish children received doses of mercury that would horrify modern doctors. Crying infants were given soothing syrups that contained opium, alcohol, and sometimes lead compounds, medicines that certainly made the babies quiet, but often at a terrible cost. The wealthy, ironically, often suffered more from medical treatment than the poor. They could afford the most exotic ingredients, the most elaborate preparations, the most frequent visits from physicians. A poor person with a headache might simply rest and drink water. A rich person would receive carefully prepared doses of antimony, mercury, and ground gemstones, administered by a learned physician who truly believed he was providing the finest care available. The poor person would likely recover. The rich person might not. And so we leave that chamber of good intentions and terrible outcomes, that place where learning and ignorance dance together in a waltz of hope and horror. The physician continues his work, grinding his mysterious powders, preparing his metallic potions, confident in theories that will someday seem as primitive as stone knives and bear skins. But as we step out into the night air, breathing deeply of the cool, clean darkness, remember that these people were not so different from us. They loved, they feared, they hoped just as we do. They simply lived in a time when the map of knowledge had vast territories marked, "Here be dragons," and they did their best to navigate by whatever stars they could see. The dangers we've witnessed tonight were not contained within the physician's chamber. They seeped into every corner of daily life, hiding in the most innocent places. In a lady's cosmetics, in a child's candy, in the very walls of what should have been the safest place of all, home. Let your breathing slow now. Let your heartbeat settle into the rhythm of someone walking slowly through quiet streets. Feel the weight of your eyelids as we approach that home, that place where beauty masked poison, where luxury came at the cost of life itself, where even the air you breathed might carry invisible death. But don't be afraid. We're just visitors here, observers from a safer time. We can witness these stories without living them, learn from these mistakes without paying their price. And in that safety, in that distance, find the gentle gratitude that leads to the deepest, most peaceful sleep. Chapter 2. The Silent Killers in Your Home. We're standing now in the bedroom of a lady from the 18th century. Candlelight flickers across walls, covered in rich brocade. The air carries the faint scent of lavender water. Everything appears elegant, refined. But there's a poison present right there on the dressing table. In this era, skin as white as porcelain, completely flawless, was considered the pinnacle of beauty and social status. It showed that you didn't labor under the sun, that you belonged to the upper class. But how could you achieve that appearance when smallpox often left terrible, pitted scars across faces? The answer lay in a small porcelain box, a face powder that was white as silk, smooth as velvet, called Venetian ceruse, or spirits of Saturn. It was incredibly effective. Just a thin layer could hide every flaw, create luminous, perfect skin. It was the beauty secret of Queen Elizabeth I and countless aristocrats across Europe. But the main ingredient in this miraculous powder was white lead. Imagine you are that lady. Every morning, you apply a layer of toxic lead to your face, neck, and chest. The lead slowly absorbs through your skin, entering your bloodstream. At first, it causes only minor problems. Your skin might become dry, corroded, forcing you to use even more powder to hide the damage it's causing. A vicious cycle. But over time, the consequences become more serious. Your hair begins to fall out. Your gums develop a blue-gray line around them, called the Burton line. Your teeth loosen and fall out one by one. You suffer severe stomach cramps, constipation, chronic fatigue. Your nervous system is damaged, causing trembling hands and memory loss. Chronic lead poisoning. The beauty you're pursuing is slowly killing you from the inside. And it wasn't just lead. To create rosy cheeks, people used vermilion, a brilliant red powder made from cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide. To achieve sparkling, wide eyes, they would drop belladonna into them, an extract from the deadly nightshade plant. Belladonna dilated the pupils, creating a dreamy, seductive gaze. But it also caused blurred vision, hallucinations, and if used too frequently, could cause blindness or death. The woman in the mirror, with her porcelain skin, pink cheeks, and luminous eyes, might be one of the most beautiful women of her age. But she's also a walking periodic table of toxic elements. She's paying for a beauty standard with her health and her life, a story that's not so unfamiliar, even in our modern world, is it? Only the poisons have changed form. Let that image of the woman fade away. Think of your own skin breathing freely, being itself beneath soft blankets. No lead covering it. No toxic substances eating away at it. Just the safe, comfortable feeling of being natural, of being protected. Feel the relaxation spread across your face, across your shoulders, and let it carry you deeper into rest. Now, come with me down to the kitchen, a large kitchen in a well-to-do Victorian household. A fire burns in the hearth, and the scent of fresh baking fills the air. But even here, in this warm and abundant place, danger lurks. You think food additives are a modern problem? Think again. In the 19th century, before any food safety regulations existed, adulterating and adding toxic substances to food was a widespread art for increasing profits. Your bread has that lovely white color, not necessarily because of quality flour. Sometimes bakers would mix alum or even plaster of Paris into the dough to make bread whiter and heavier. Children's candy comes in brilliant, eye-catching colors. That vivid green, it might be made from verdigris, a copper compound that's toxic. The bright red, possibly red lead. The yellow, lead chromate. Those sweet candies are essentially little poison pills. Your pickles have that appetizing crisp green color. People might have cooked them in copper pots to achieve that hue, or even added sulfuric acid. Your milk seems thin. The seller might have added water, then chalk or ground sheep brains to make it appear thick and white again. The German chemist Friedrich Achem caused a sensation when he published a treatise on adulterations of food and culinary poisons in 1820 with the frightening words on the cover, "There is death in the pot." He exposed hundreds of food fraud schemes, terrifying the public while enraging dishonest manufacturers. He was threatened, sued, and eventually forced to flee England. He had spoken the truth too soon, so every meal was a gamble. You never really knew what you were eating. The feeling of fullness might come with a dose of lead, copper, or plaster. How ironic that in an age when people feared poisonous air, they were willingly eating tangible poisons without knowing it. Let me paint you a more detailed picture of a typical Victorian kitchen, where this dangerous game of culinary roulette played out daily. The kitchen was the heart of the home, warm and bustling with activity, filled with the sounds of chopping, stirring, and the constant hiss of steam from pots simmering over the fire. But look more closely at what's actually happening here. The flour being sifted for tomorrow's bread might be mixed with chalk dust to make it appear whiter and more refined. The baker knows that customers judge quality by color. The whiter the bread, the more pure it must be. So chalk it is, along with alum to improve the texture, and sometimes even bone ash to make the loaves rise higher. The tea leaves steeping in that elegant porcelain pot might not be tea at all. Used tea leaves were often dried, colored with toxic dyes, and resold as fresh. Some tea was actually made from dried and processed hawthorn leaves, sloe leaves, or even ash tree leaves, all tinted with copper compounds to achieve that proper tea color. The honey drizzling golden over fresh biscuits might be corn syrup colored with lead chromate for that rich amber hue. Real honey was expensive. Fake honey was profitable. The same beautiful color, the same sweet taste, but with a hidden dose of poison that accumulated in the body over years of consumption. Coffee was another common target for adulteration. Ground acorns, chicory, and roasted grain were mixed with real coffee beans to stretch the supply. But some unscrupulous dealers went further, adding ground brick dust for color and weight, or even sawdust from furniture workshops. The bitter taste was masked with extra sugar, which itself might be adulterated with sand or chalk. Wine and spirits weren't safe either. Cheap wine was often nothing more than water, alcohol, and chemical dyes flavored with acids and sweetened with lead-based compounds that gave it a pleasant taste but slowly poisoned those who drank it regularly. The wealthy thought they were buying quality, but they were often purchasing their own slow death. The most heartbreaking victims were children. Sweets were a rare treat for most families, saved for special occasions or bought as rewards for good behavior. But these colorful candies were often the most dangerous foods of all. Lead-based pigments created beautiful reds and yellows. Copper compounds made brilliant greens and blues. Mercury compounds produced other exotic colors that fascinated children and drew them like moths to a flame. Parents would watch their children's faces light up at the sight of these rainbow-colored treats, never knowing that they were essentially feeding them paint chips. Children who ate these candies regularly would develop learning problems, behavioral issues, and mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. The very treats meant to bring joy were stealing away futures. One bright, beautiful piece at a time. Let's leave the kitchen now and move to another room. Perhaps the parlor or a child's bedroom. You notice something immediately. The wallpaper. It has a stunning emerald green color, vibrant and fresh. A very fashionable color in the 19th century, known as Scheele's green. This green was created from a compound containing arsenic, one of history's most notorious poisons. When this wallpaper was dry, it was completely harmless. But in humid climates, like in England, or when moisture condensed on the walls, mold could develop on the paste underneath. These molds would interact with the arsenic dye, releasing a colorless, odorless, poisonous gas called arson into the air. The entire family living in that room would slowly inhale arsenic gas every day. Initial symptoms were very vague: headaches, nausea, rashes. They might think they had a persistent cold or blame it on bad weather. But gradually, things got worse. Children, with their weaker immune systems, were usually the first victims. They would become sickly, pale, and sometimes die mysteriously. It's suspected that this green wallpaper contributed to Napoleon Bonaparte's death when he was exiled on the damp island of St. Helena. Analysis of his hair later showed unusually high levels of arsenic. Imagine the horror of discovering that the very beauty of your home, something you took pride in, was secretly poisoning your children. That the fresh air you breathed each night in your bedroom was filled with a deadly toxin. The house, which should have been a safe refuge, had become a trap. But the arsenic wallpaper story goes deeper than just a single bad decision about home decoration. It represents the collision between the Industrial Revolution's new chemical capabilities and humanity's complete ignorance about toxicology. Suddenly, chemists could create colors that had never existed before: brilliant greens, electric blues, shocking pinks, all through the magic of newly discovered chemical compounds. These weren't subtle earth tones made from clay and plant dyes. These were colors that seemed to glow with their own internal light. Colors so vivid they made traditional decorations look dull and lifeless by comparison. Wealthy families competed to have the most fashionable, most brilliantly colored rooms in their homes. Green was particularly popular because it was associated with nature, with freshness, with the growing environmental awareness of the Romantic period. Wallpaper manufacturers rushed to meet this demand, and Sheely's green became their miracle product. It was stable, it didn't fade in sunlight, and it could be produced relatively cheaply. Factory workers mixed vast batches of arsenic compounds with binding agents, creating rolls upon rolls of this deadly, beautiful paper. The workers themselves often became the first casualties. They would develop what became known as wallpaper workers' disease, a mysterious ailment that caused hair loss, skin lesions, and eventual death. But the connection wasn't made. Factory conditions were generally terrible in that era, and worker deaths were often attributed to the general hazards of industrial labor rather than specific toxic exposures. Meanwhile, in drawing rooms and nurseries across Europe and America, families were unknowingly conducting a slow-motion experiment in chronic arsenic poisoning. The wealthy districts, with their grand homes and fashionable decorations, actually had higher rates of mysterious illnesses than poorer areas where people couldn't afford such luxurious wallpaper. Children were particularly vulnerable because they spent more time indoors, often playing on floors near the walls where arsenic concentrations were highest. They would develop what parents thought were just childhood weaknesses: pale complexions, frequent illnesses, learning difficulties, behavioral problems. These children were often described as delicate or sickly, when in reality they were being systematically poisoned by their own bedrooms. The most tragic cases occurred in nurseries, where parents had chosen the most beautiful, most expensive wallpaper to create a perfect environment for their babies. These rooms, decorated with love and the finest materials money could buy, became chambers of slow death. Infants who should have been thriving instead grew weak and listless, their small bodies unable to process the constant low-level arsenic exposure. Doctors of the time were baffled by these mysterious childhood ailments that seemed to cluster in wealthy families. They proposed numerous theories: bad air, weak bloodlines, excessive refinement making children vulnerable to disease. The idea that beauty itself could be poison was almost inconceivable to minds that equated wealth and taste with health and safety. What an unsettling feeling it must have been to realize that the most familiar things could be the most dangerous. When beauty, food, the very walls that surrounded you could hide unexpected threats. Ignorance didn't just reside in doctors' chambers, it crept into every corner of daily life. And it didn't stop at the front door. When people stepped outside into the growing cities, another invisible enemy was waiting. An enemy you could smell, but couldn't see and couldn't understand at all. Let your mind drift now out of that house, floating upward, looking down at the rooftops and streets. Listen to the breathing of the ancient city and prepare to feel another strange theory, the theory of bad air. Feel your body sinking deeper into your bed, deeper into safety. No lead on your skin, no arsenic in your walls, no strange chemicals in your food, just the pure, simple luxury of being able to trust your environment. Let that gratitude wash over you like warm water, carrying away any lingering tension. The rain outside has grown softer now, barely a whisper against the windows. The clock still marks time with its gentle rhythm, but even that seems to be slowing, matching the pace of your breathing, the rhythm of your heartbeat as it settles into the cadence of approaching sleep. We've seen how people lived with danger hiding in plain sight, how they pursued beauty and comfort without knowing the price they were paying. But they weren't passive victims. They were seekers, always looking for ways to improve their lives, to make their world more beautiful, more comfortable, more safe. They just didn't know what safety really meant. In our next chapter, we'll step outside these poisoned homes into the streets and squares of ancient cities, where another great misunderstanding was shaping the course of human history, where the very air itself was thought to carry death, and where the fight against disease became a battle against the wrong enemy entirely. But that's still to come. For now, let the images of emerald wallpaper and white lead powder fade away like morning mist. Let the sounds of that busy Victorian kitchen grow quiet. There's only the soft patter of rain, the gentle tick of time passing, and the steady rhythm of your own breathing, carrying you deeper into peace. Soon, we'll walk together through the narrow streets of London, through the foggy alleys of medieval Paris, through the crowded squares of ancient Rome. We'll breathe the air that our ancestors breathed, smell the scents they smelled, and understand why they believed that danger floated on every breeze. But first, rest here in this moment between stories. Feel the clean air filling your lungs, air that has been filtered and purified by centuries of learning, by the gradual accumulation of knowledge that our ancestors died to give us. Each breath you take is a gift from the past, purchased with their mistakes, their suffering, their relentless curiosity about how the world really works. Close your eyes now, if they aren't closed already. Let the darkness be your friend, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. There's nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let the next part of our journey begin when you're ready. Chapter 3. When Air was the Enemy. For many centuries, before Louis Pasteur's germ theory, humanity lived under the dominion of another idea, one that was both intuitively logical and fatally wrong. Miasma theory. Miasma is an ancient Greek word meaning pollution or poisonous vapor. This theory claimed that diseases, especially epidemics like plague, cholera, and malaria, weren't caused by microorganisms, but by breathing bad air. This air was created by the decay of organic matter, garbage, animal carcasses, sewage, swamps. Basically, if something smelled bad, it was believed to have the power to cause disease. The idea made sense, didn't it? The filthiest, most foul-smelling slums were where epidemics hit hardest. Stagnant swamps were where malaria, from Italian meaning bad air, raged. Our sense of smell seemed to be warning us of danger. So the battle against disease became a battle against bad odors. Step with me into the streets of 18th century London. The stench hits you immediately. The smell of uncollected garbage, open sewers, smoke from thousands of chimneys, and the Thames River, which had become nothing more than a gigantic drain. To protect themselves from miasma, the wealthy would carry pomanders, elegantly carved metal spheres filled with aromatic substances like ambergris, musk, cinnamon, and cloves. They would hold these to their noses when passing through foul-smelling areas, believing that strong, pleasant scents would overpower and neutralize the poisonous air. During plague outbreaks, doctors wore those bizarre costumes that looked like giant birds. Long robes, gloves, and especially that famous bird-like mask with its long beak. That beak wasn't meant to frighten people. It was stuffed full of aromatic herbs and spices. They believed that breathing through this layer of herbs would filter the air clean before it reached their lungs. In hospitals, people would burn sulfur, aromatic resins, or even gunpowder to fumigate and purify the air. They would throw open windows, even in freezing winter, believing that wind would blow the miasma away. An action that might kill pneumonia patients from cold, but performed with the best intentions. Picture yourself as a physician in this era, standing in a hospital ward. The windows are flung wide despite the bitter winter wind. Braziers burn throughout the room, filling the air with thick, choking smoke from burning herbs and chemicals. You wear your leather beak, filled with aromatic oils, breathing laboriously through layers of lavender and clove. Around you, patients shiver under thin blankets. their condition worsening not from disease alone, but from your well-intentioned efforts to save them. You truly believe you're fighting an invisible enemy that floats on every breeze. You can see its effects, the clusters of sickness in certain neighborhoods, the way disease seems to follow the wind patterns, the correlation between foul smells and human suffering. Your theory makes perfect sense based on everything you can observe. You just happen to be completely wrong. The miasma theory wasn't just a medical curiosity, it shaped entire cities. Urban planners designed sewage systems not to protect water supplies, but to remove bad smells from populated areas. They built parks and tree-lined boulevards not primarily for beauty, but because they believed fresh, plant-filtered air would drive away disease-causing vapors. Wealthy families would flee cities during summer months, not just to escape heat, but to avoid the unhealthy air that rose from warm, crowded streets. They built their country estates on hilltops, where the air was believed to be purer and less contaminated by the miasmic vapors that pooled in valleys and low-lying areas. Even architecture was influenced by miasma theory. High ceilings and tall windows weren't just aesthetic choices. They were health measures designed to allow bad air to rise and escape while drawing in fresh air from above. Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring spaces, were seen as naturally healthy buildings, while low, cramped quarters were viewed as breeding grounds for disease-causing vapors. Miasma theory didn't just lead to strange preventive measures. It led to deadly mistakes in public policy. And no example is more tragic than London's Great Stink of 1858 and the cholera epidemics that preceded it. Cholera was a terrifying disease. It caused violent diarrhea and vomiting, rapidly dehydrating victims who could die within hours. When cholera struck London, the city plunged into panic. The authorities, believers in miasma theory, decided the cause was the foul odors rising from open sewers and waste pits. Their solution? A sanitary improvement. They decided to build an elaborate underground sewer system to dump all the city's waste directly into the Thames River. They thought they were cleaning the city, eliminating the source of miasma, but they didn't know that cholera bacteria, Vibrio cholerae, lived in contaminated water. The Thames was also the main drinking water source for much of London's population. By dumping sewage into the river, they had turned the city's drinking water supply into a giant poison cocktail. Cholera outbreaks became even more devastating. The more they tried to clean the air by moving waste to the river, the more they contaminated the water and killed people. A tragedy of good intentions. Let me take you to the Thames during this period. Stand on one of the bridges on a warm summer day in 1858. The smell rising from the water below is so powerful it makes your eyes water. The river has turned a greenish-brown color, thick with sewage and industrial waste. Dead fish float on the surface alongside other debris you prefer not to identify. Parliament itself was affected. The windows facing the Thames had to be draped with lime-soaked curtains to make the chambers bearable. Gentlemen walking along the river held handkerchiefs soaked in perfume to their faces. Ladies fainted from the stench. The very heart of the British Empire was being overwhelmed by the smell of its own waste. But the real tragedy was happening in the homes of ordinary Londoners. Families who couldn't afford private wells drew their drinking water directly from the Thames. They would wake in the morning and fill their buckets from the same river that served as the city's toilet. The water looked brown and smelled foul, but it was all they had. A mother would boil this water to make tea for her children's breakfast, not knowing that boiling couldn't destroy the cholera bacteria. A father would wash his face with river water before heading to work, unknowingly introducing deadly microorganisms to his mouth and nose. Children would play by the river's edge, splashing in water that was essentially liquid death. When these families began falling ill with cholera, doctors would arrive with their miasma theories and aromatic compounds. They would burn herbs in the sick rooms, open windows to let in fresh air, which often just brought in more stench from the river, and prescribe rest and purification rituals. Meanwhile, the real killer, contaminated water, continued to flow through the household, claiming victim after victim. One man, a doctor named John Snow, didn't believe in miasma theory. He noticed that people who drank water from a specific public pump on Broad Street had unusually high rates of cholera. He did something very simple but revolutionary. He made a map. He marked the location of every cholera death, and he saw that they clustered densely around that particular pump. He convinced local authorities to remove the pump handle, and like magic, cholera cases in that area dropped dramatically. John Snow had proven that cholera spread through water, not air. But his discovery was ignored and ridiculed by the medical community of his time. They clung to miasma theory. It would take years, until after Louis Pasteur proved the existence of microorganisms, before John Snow's work was recognized. He was one of the founding fathers of modern epidemiology, a hero who saw the truth but wasn't listened to. Imagine John Snow's frustration as he stood before rooms full of learned physicians, trying to explain his map, his careful observations, his logical conclusions. Picture him pointing to the cluster of black dots around the Broad Street pump, each dot representing a human life lost, while his colleagues shook their heads and muttered about bad air and atmospheric corruption. He knew he was right. He had the evidence literally mapped out in front of him. But knowledge without acceptance is like having a cure that no one will take. Snow watched as cholera continued to ravage London, knowing that he had found the key to stopping it, but powerless to make anyone believe him. The pump he identified stood in the middle of a busy neighborhood. Every day, families would come with their buckets and jugs, drawing water that sparkled clear in the sunlight but carried invisible death. Children would splash playfully in the overflow, their laughter echoing off surrounding buildings, while their parents filled containers with poison they couldn't see, smell, or taste. Snow's map told a story that was both elegant and horrifying in its simplicity. Disease wasn't floating mysteriously through the air. It was flowing through the water supply, following the logical patterns of plumbing and human behavior. The families who lived closest to the contaminated pump suffered the most. Those who used other water sources remained healthy. The pattern was so clear that it should have been undeniable. But paradigms die hard, especially when they're supported by centuries of belief and the authority of respected institutions. The miasma theory wasn't just a medical hypothesis. It was a worldview, a way of understanding the relationship between environment and health that seemed to explain so much about why disease struck where and when it did. Imagine Jon Snow standing by his map, those small black dots scattered across the paper, each one a life ended too soon. He saw the pattern, saw the truth. But around him was an ocean of skepticism. Sometimes truth doesn't shine like a beacon. It needs time. It needs patience. It needs brave people willing to go against the beliefs of their age. Now, let those crowded London streets fade away. Let the image of that polluted river dissolve. Just listen to your own breathing. A breath of clean air, safe air. Feel it filling your lungs, nourishing your body. A simple gift that those people couldn't take for granted. Let yourself sink into gratitude for that simple safety. The miasma theory represents one of history's most persistent and widespread medical errors. For over 2,000 years, humanity fought disease by fighting smell, fought epidemics by fighting air, fought death by fighting the wrong enemy entirely. But we must understand, this wasn't stupidity. It was logical reasoning based on incomplete information. The connection between filth and disease was real. It just wasn't the connection they thought it was. Garbage and sewage did cause illness, but not through vapors. They created breeding grounds for bacteria, contaminated water supplies, and attracted disease-carrying insects and rodents. The wealthy, with their pomanders and country estates, often did stay healthier. Not because they avoided bad air, but because they could afford cleaner water, better food, less crowded living conditions, and distance from the urban poor who bore the brunt of epidemic diseases. The irony is that many of the solutions inspired by miasma theory actually worked, just not for the reasons people thought. Building sewers did improve public health, even when they dumped waste in rivers, because they removed sewage from immediate contact with people. Creating parks and wide boulevards did reduce disease, not by purifying air, but by reducing overcrowding and improving living conditions. Even the plague doctor's strange costumes provided some protection, though not through aromatic filtration. The long robes and gloves created a barrier between doctor and patient, reducing direct contact with infected bodily fluids. The beak masks, while useless against airborne miasma, might have provided minimal protection against actual respiratory droplets from coughing patients. Consider the psychological burden of living under miasma theory. Every breath was potentially dangerous. Every foul smell was a threat to life. People lived in constant vigilance against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't effectively fight. They carried charms and amulets against bad air, burned expensive herbs and incense, and lived in perpetual anxiety about the invisible poisons that might be floating around them at any moment. Wealthy families would employ air tasters, servants whose job was to sample the air in different rooms and report on its quality. They installed elaborate ventilation systems, not to bring in fresh air for comfort, but as defensive measures against atmospheric poison. They timed their daily activities around wind patterns and weather conditions, believing that certain atmospheric conditions made the air more or less dangerous. The poor, unable to afford such precautions, were seen as naturally more susceptible to disease because they had to live and work in areas with bad air. This reinforced social prejudices and class distinctions, making disease seem like a natural consequence of social status rather than environmental conditions that could be improved through public health measures. Travel was planned around miasma concerns. Merchants would avoid certain routes during particular seasons, not because of weather or political instability, but because of beliefs about seasonal changes in air quality. Entire industries developed around producing and selling protection against bad air. Perfumes, aromatic compounds, special breathing devices, and architectural features designed to purify indoor atmospheres. The medical profession built elaborate theoretical frameworks around miasma theory. They classified different types of bad air, mapped their supposed sources and movements, and developed complex treatment protocols based on atmospheric conditions. Medical schools taught courses on aerial medicine and atmospheric pathology. Students learned to diagnose diseases based on wind direction, humidity levels, and proximity to swamps or garbage dumps. Military campaigns were planned with miasma in mind. Armies would avoid camping in low-lying areas where bad air was thought to pool. Naval vessels would burn aromatic substances below decks and time their port visits to avoid seasons when coastal air was believed to be most dangerous. Entire battles were sometimes postponed because commanders feared that atmospheric conditions would make their soldiers more susceptible to disease than combat. The persistence of miasma theory shows how difficult it can be to overturn established ideas, even when evidence begins to accumulate against them. Jon Snow's map was just one of many pieces of evidence that didn't fit the theory, but each contradiction was explained away rather than used to question the fundamental assumptions. When Pasteur finally demonstrated the existence of microorganisms and their role in disease, it didn't immediately destroy miasma theory. Instead, many physicians tried to incorporate germs into miasma frameworks, suggesting that bad air somehow created or activated these microscopic creatures. It took decades for the full implications of germ theory to be accepted, and for miasma theory to be completely abandoned. And so, humanity spent centuries fighting shadows, battling phantoms that existed only in the realm of theory and fear. They breathed through herbs and spices, fled from odors, and built entire cities around the need to escape an enemy that was never really there. But their efforts weren't wasted. In seeking to purify air, they often purified water. In trying to escape bad smells, they created cleaner, more organized urban environments. In fighting the wrong war, they sometimes won the right battles. Most importantly, they never stopped seeking answers. Even when their theories were wrong, their commitment to understanding and defeating disease was unwavering. They laid the groundwork for the breakthroughs that would eventually come when brave individuals would risk their careers and reputations to challenge established wisdom. The darkness we've walked through tonight, the bloodletting chambers, the poisoned homes, the cities choking on their own ignorance, wasn't the end of the story. It was preparation. Every mistake taught a lesson. Every failure pointed toward truth. Every life lost in the service of wrong theories brought humanity one step closer to right ones. Now, we come to the final part of our journey together. The part where light begins to pierce the darkness, where individual curiosity and courage start to build the foundations of modern understanding, where the heroes emerge, not the sword-wielding kind, but the quiet observers, the persistent questioners, the people brave enough to say, "What if we're wrong?" Let your breathing slow now, matching the gentle rhythm of change itself. Feel your body settling deeper into comfort as we prepare to meet those remarkable people who began to turn the tide. The night is almost over, and dawn is about to break. Rest here for a moment, suspended between the darkness of ignorance and the light of discovery. Feel the clean air flowing in and out of your lungs, air that countless generations fought to understand and purify. Each breath connects you to that long struggle, to the gradual triumph of knowledge over fear, of observation over assumption. Soon, we'll meet the people who began to see clearly, who trusted their own eyes who were more than ancient authorities, who dared to suggest that the world worked differently than everyone believed. These weren't dramatic heroes. They were quiet revolutionaries, armed with nothing more than curiosity, persistence, and the courage to be wrong in public if it meant being right eventually. Close your eyes and let yourself drift toward that dawn, toward the moment when humanity began to win its long war against disease. Not through dramatic battles, but through careful observation, humble questions, and the simple, radical act of washing one's hands. Chapter 4: Accidental Heroes and the Dawn of Understanding. In the mid-19th century, at Vienna General Hospital, there were two maternity wards. Both served poor women who couldn't afford to give birth at home. But there was a terrifying difference. In the first ward, where medical students practiced, the death rate from childbed fever could reach 35%. Out of every 10 mothers, as many as 3 might die after giving birth. Pregnant women feared being assigned to this ward. They would beg to be transferred to the other ward, sometimes even choosing to give birth on the street rather than enter that place of death. In the second ward, where midwives trained, the death rate was only around 4%. Why was there such a horrifying difference? People offered all sorts of theories. Bad air, poor diet, the fear of the mothers themselves. But one Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis couldn't accept those explanations. He was haunted by this difference. He observed, recorded, compared, and then he noticed a crucial detail. The medical students in the first ward often came directly from the dissection room, where they cut up corpses, straight to the delivery room to assist with births. They would only briefly wipe their hands on a shared towel. Semmelweis proposed a bold hypothesis, almost insulting at the time. Some invisible, cadaverous matter from the dead bodies was clinging to the students' hands and being transmitted to the mothers, causing the deadly fever. He instituted a very simple rule. All doctors and students must wash their hands thoroughly with chlorine solution before entering the delivery room. The results were astonishing. The death rate in the first ward plummeted to below 1%, matching the second ward. He had saved countless lives with nothing more than a basin of chlorinated water. You'd think he would be hailed as a hero, wouldn't you? He wasn't. Semmelweis was ridiculed, criticized, and ostracized by the Vienna medical community. The doctors felt insulted. His suggestion implied that their hands, the hands of gentlemen, were dirty and disease-carrying. They couldn't accept such an idea. Miasma theory still held too much sway. Broken and bitter, Semmelweis eventually lost his position, returned to Hungary, and died in a mental institution, possibly from an infection in a wound on his hand. The very man who discovered the importance of preventing infection died of infection. a tragic irony of history. But his idea, the seed he had planted, didn't die. It was just waiting for the right time to sprout. Let me take you deeper into Semmelweis's world, into the mind of a man who saw a truth that no one else could accept. Picture him in his small office at the hospital, surrounded by mortality statistics that he had meticulously compiled. Neat columns of numbers that told a story of needless death, of mothers who should have lived to hold their babies, but instead became victims of ignorance. He would work late into the night by candlelight, comparing data from the two wards, searching for patterns that others missed. His colleagues thought he was becoming obsessed, perhaps even mentally unbalanced. Why was he so fixated on hand washing? Why couldn't he accept the established explanations for childbed fever? But Semmelweis had seen something that changed him forever. He had witnessed the moment when an idea becomes knowledge, when a hypothesis proves itself so dramatically that doubt becomes impossible. That day, when the death rates dropped, when mothers who should have died instead went home with their babies, that was the day modern medicine began to be born. The resistance he faced wasn't just professional skepticism. It was the massive inertia of an entire worldview. For centuries, medicine had been about balancing humors, fighting miasma, treating symptoms with complex theories and elaborate remedies. The idea that disease could be prevented by something as mundane as soap and water seemed to trivialize everything physicians had learned, everything they represented. His colleagues saw him as a threat to their authority, their expertise, their very identity as learned men. If disease could be stopped by hand washing, what did that say about their years of university training, their knowledge of Latin texts, their sophisticated understanding of human physiology? Semmelweis was asking them to abandon not just their theories, but their sense of themselves. The hospital where he worked became a battlefield between old and new ways of thinking. In the delivery rooms, some younger doctors began secretly following his protocols, washing their hands with chlorine when supervisors weren't watching. They saw the results: fewer infections, fewer deaths. But they couldn't speak openly about it without risking their careers. Meanwhile, Semmelweis grew increasingly frustrated and bitter. He would walk the halls of the hospital, watching mothers die from preventable infections, knowing that he had the solution, but being powerless to implement it. He began writing angry letters to prominent physicians across Europe, calling them murderers for ignoring his findings. His language became more and more intemperate, his accusations more personal and inflammatory. The medical establishment closed ranks against him. His contract wasn't renewed. His applications for positions at other hospitals were rejected. He returned to Budapest, where he eventually secured a position at a smaller hospital But the pattern repeated itself. Resistance, conflict, gradual isolation from his peers. His final years were marked by increasing mental instability. Whether this was caused by the stress of being a medical pariah, by early onset dementia, or by lead poisoning from the paints and chemicals he used in his research, we'll never know. What we do know is that he died in the very type of institution where his ideas about infection control could have saved countless lives, including perhaps his own. Think about the simple act of washing hands, something we do daily without thought. But behind that action is an entire story of struggle, of sacrifice, of a man who saw truth but couldn't convince the world. Feel the cleanliness, the safety, and let that gentle gratitude spread like warm water, washing away any remaining tension. Sleep is very close now. Semmelweis's seed was nurtured by a French chemist, someone we've already mentioned, Louis Pasteur. Pasteur wasn't a doctor. He studied fermentation in wine and beer. French wine producers came to him with a problem. Why did their wine sometimes turn sour and spoil? Using his microscope, Pasteur discovered that tiny organisms, yeasts, were responsible for good fermentation, and other different microorganisms cause spoilage. He realized he could kill the harmful microorganisms by heating the wine to a moderate temperature. That process is now called pasteurization. From wine and beer, he moved to diseases in silkworms, then to animal diseases and human illness. He proved convincingly that these tiny creatures, these germs, were everywhere, in air, in water, on our hands, and they were the real cause of infectious disease and decay, not bad air. Germ theory was born. It overthrew miasma theory that had dominated for thousands of years. An English surgeon named Joseph Lister, after reading Pasteur's work, asked himself, if bacteria cause decay, perhaps they also cause infections and surgical wounds. Lister began spraying carbolic acid, phenol, a disinfectant, on surgical instruments, on doctors' hands, and even into the air in operating rooms. The results were as dramatic as Semmelweis's. The death rate from post-surgical infections dropped from nearly 50% to about 15%. Surgery was no longer a death sentence. It had become much, much safer. This time, the world listened. Lister was praised as the father of antiseptic surgery. The revolution had truly begun. Pasteur and Lister's discoveries paved the way for all medical advances that followed: antibiotics, vaccines, hospital hygiene. Everything was built on the simple foundation that the enemy is tiny creatures and we can destroy them. But let me paint you a fuller picture of this transformation, this moment when humanity finally began to see its true enemy. Imagine Pasteur in his laboratory, bent over his microscope, peering into a world that no human had ever really understood before. Under that lens, a single drop of sour wine became a battlefield, teeming with microscopic warriors locked in combat. He could see the good yeasts working steadily to transform grape juice into wine, and the invading bacteria that turned that same wine into vinegar. It was like watching a war in miniature, a conflict that explained so much about the visible world above. Why food spoiled, why wounds festered, why diseases spread through populations like invisible armies conquering territory. The implications were staggering. For the first time in human history, someone could see the actual agents of disease and decay. They weren't mysterious vapors or spiritual imbalances. They were living creatures with their own patterns of behavior, their own vulnerabilities, their own ways of reproducing and spreading. Pasteur's laboratory became a revolution in miniature. He developed techniques for growing these microorganisms in controlled conditions, for studying their life cycles, for testing what could kill them and what allowed them to thrive. Each experiment revealed new truths about the invisible world that surrounded and inhabited every living thing. When he heated wine to specific temperatures, he could watch the harmful bacteria die while leaving the wine itself unchanged. When he exposed bacteria to certain chemicals, he could observe their immediate death. For the first time, humans had weapons that could target their microscopic enemies with precision. The transition from Pasteur's laboratory to Lister's operating room represents one of the most direct applications of scientific discovery to human welfare in history. Lister didn't just read about Pasteur's findings. He immediately grasped their surgical implications and began experimenting with antiseptic techniques. Picture Lister's operating theater in those early days of antiseptic surgery. The air is thick with carbolic acid spray, creating a fine mist that settles on everything and everyone. Nurses move through this chemical fog, their hands and instruments dripping with disinfectant. The surgeon himself appears almost ghostly through the antiseptic haze, his clothes and hair damp with phenol. The smell is overwhelming, sharp, medicinal, completely unlike the familiar odors of blood and decay that had characterized surgery for centuries. Assistants work pumps that maintain a constant spray of carbolic acid throughout the procedure. Every surface, every tool, every hand is repeatedly doused with this chemical weapon against invisible enemies. Patients, conscious during much of this, anesthesia was still primitive, found themselves in an alien environment. Instead of the quick, brutal surgery of earlier eras, they experienced a methodical, almost ritualistic process where every movement was guided by unseen considerations of bacterial contamination. But the results spoke for themselves. Wounds that should have festered remained clean. Patients who should have died from infection instead recovered completely. Surgical procedures that had been too dangerous to attempt became routine. The operating room was transformed from a place of last resort into a place of genuine healing. The collaboration between Pasteur and Lister, though they worked in different countries and different fields, represents the power of scientific knowledge to transcend boundaries. Pasteur's discoveries about fermentation led directly to Lister's innovations in surgery, which in turn influenced hospital design, nursing practices, and eventually the entire structure of modern medicine. Other pioneers quickly joined this revolution. In Germany, Robert Koch developed techniques for identifying specific disease-causing bacteria. In England, Florence Nightingale revolutionized nursing by applying principles of cleanliness and infection control to patient care. In Hungary, Semmelweis's ideas were finally vindicated and adopted decades after his death. Each discovery built upon the others, creating a cascade of understanding that transformed humanity's relationship with disease. The invisible world was no longer unknowable. It was a realm that could be explored, mapped, and conquered through careful observation and scientific method, from bloodletting to hand washing, from miasma to bacteria. It was a long, difficult journey, paid for with countless lives. The stories we've heard tonight aren't meant to mock the past. They're meant to help us understand, to see that the knowledge we take for granted today was once a struggle filled with courage and sacrifice. Now then, our journey is nearly complete. Those characters, those stories, let them gently fade into the past. Only the peace of the present remains. Only the steady rhythm of your breathing. Feel the safety that surrounds you, built on the foundation of all those mistakes, all those discoveries, all those brave souls who dared to question what everyone else accepted. Rest in the knowledge that their struggles gave us the gift of understanding, the blessing of being able to trust in healing rather than fear it. The dawn is breaking now, not just in our story, but in the gradual lightening of your consciousness toward sleep. Let yourself drift toward that gentle morning of dreams, carried by the rhythm of progress itself, the slow but steady march of human knowledge toward light. Close your eyes now, if they aren't already closed. Feel the gratitude flowing through you like a warm current. Gratitude for clean water, for effective medicine, for the simple luxury of living in an age when healing is the norm rather than the exception. Every breath you take is a gift from those who came before. Every moment of health a tribute to their persistent questioning of how the world really works. The heroes of our story weren't the kind who wore armor or carried swords. They were the kind who carried questions, who trusted their own observations more than ancient authorities, who were willing to be wrong in public if it meant being right eventually. They gave us the greatest gift imaginable, the ability to live without fear of invisible enemies we couldn't understand or fight. Sleep now, knowing that you are the beneficiary of their courage, the inheritor of their wisdom, the living proof that knowledge, however slowly and painfully acquired, ultimately triumphs over ignorance. Rest in the peace they purchased for you with their struggles, their failures, and their eventual magnificent success. The transformation from the medical world we've explored tonight to the one you live in today didn't happen overnight. It took generations of doctors, nurses, researchers, and patients working together to build the system of care that now protects you. Each small discovery built upon the others, like stones in a vast cathedral of knowledge. Think about what happened in the decades following Pasteur and Lister's breakthroughs. Hospitals began to look completely different. The old wards, with their crowded beds and poor ventilation, gave way to clean, well-lit spaces designed around principles of infection control. Nurses were trained not just in comfort care, but in the precise techniques of maintaining sterile environments. Medical schools restructured their entire curricula around germ theory. Students who had once learned to balance humors and identify miasmic vapors now spent their time studying bacteriology and antiseptic technique. The very language of medicine changed, replacing the poetic but inaccurate terminology of the past with precise scientific descriptions of cellular processes and microbial behavior. Perhaps most importantly, the relationship between doctors and patients evolved from one based on authority and tradition to one based on evidence and results. Patients no longer had to simply trust that bloodletting would cure their fever. They could see the direct effects of antibiotics on their infection. Families no longer had to choose between harmful treatments and no treatment at all. They could rely on therapies that had been tested, proven, and refined through scientific method. The ripple effects extended far beyond medicine. Public health became a science rather than a collection of superstitions. Cities redesigned their water and sewage systems based on bacterial contamination rather than odor control. Food safety regulations developed around actual microbial threats rather than imagined miasmic dangers. Even our daily habits reflect the victory of germ theory over miasma theory. When you wash your hands before eating, you're participating in a ritual that would have made perfect sense to Semmelweis but seemed pointless to his contemporaries. When you refrigerate food or cook meat to specific temperatures, you're applying knowledge that emerged directly from Pasteur's studies of bacterial growth and survival. The children of today grow up in a world where the invisible threats that terrified previous generations have been largely tamed. They can drink water without worrying about cholera, eat food without fearing lead poisoning, sleep in rooms without concerning themselves about arsenic wallpaper. The ambient anxiety that characterized daily life for our ancestors, the constant vigilance against invisible, unknowable dangers, has been replaced by a fundamental trust in the safety of our environment. This transformation represents one of humanity's greatest collective achievements. Not a victory won through conquest or dominion, but through the patient accumulation of knowledge, the gradual replacement of fear with understanding, the slow but steady expansion of human capability to heal rather than harm. The heroes of this story, Semmelweis, Snow, Pasteur, Lister, and countless others whose names we don't remember, gave us something more precious than gold or territory. They gave us the ability to live without fear of our own ignorance, to trust in healing, to build a world where knowledge serves life rather than threatening it. As you drift toward sleep tonight, you carry with you not just the comfort of a soft bed and clean air, but the accumulated wisdom of centuries of human struggle against disease and death. Every peaceful breath you take honors their memory. Every healthy day you live validates their sacrifice. Every moment of safety you enjoy is a testament to their refusal to accept ignorance as inevitable. Rest now in the world they built for you, the world where healing is an art based on science rather than superstition, where doctors are trained to help rather than harm, where the invisible enemies that once terrorized humanity have been identified, understood, and largely conquered. Sleep in the peace that their knowledge purchased. Dream in the safety that their discoveries provided, and wake tomorrow in a world made immeasurably better by their courage to question everything that came before them. We have walked through dark chambers, through poisoned homes, through cities choking on their own misunderstanding. We have seen healing efforts become the very source of harm. And now we have returned. Returned to your room, a place that is warm, safe. The next time you drink a cool glass of water from the tap, remember Jon Snow and his map and the polluted Thames River. The next time you wash your hands with soap, remember Ignaz Semmelweis and his bitter sacrifice. The next time you take an antibiotic for an infection, remember Joseph Lister and his clouds of carbolic acid. And the next time you visit a doctor and they use sterile instruments, diagnose with solid scientific knowledge, remember those physicians of old who did their absolute best with what they had. History isn't something distant and abstract. It lives in the smallest details of modern life. The safety we currently enjoy was built on those mistakes, those tragedies, and those magnificent discoveries of those who came before us. They, the people in our stories tonight, also loved, also feared, also hoped just as we do. They simply didn't know. And we are more fortunate because we get to live after them. We inherit the legacy of understanding. That's such a gentle thought, isn't it? A deep, quiet gratitude. Not an intense emotion, but a warm feeling spreading through your body, helping you relax completely. Let me take you deeper into this feeling of connection across time. As you lie there in your comfortable bed, surrounded by the invisible protections that modern knowledge provides, you're participating in a conversation that began thousands of years ago. Every generation has asked the same fundamental questions. How do we stay healthy? How do we heal the sick? How do we protect the ones we love from invisible threats? The answers have changed dramatically over the centuries, but the questions remain eternal. The medieval physician, mixing his mercury and antimony, was asking the same questions you ask when you reach for medicine in your cabinet. The difference isn't in the caring, or the hoping, or the human desire to heal. It's in the accumulated knowledge that stands between intention and result. Think about the extraordinary chain of discoveries that leads to your current safety. Somewhere in the past, an unknown monk carefully tended an herb garden, learning which plants could ease pain and which could cause harm. His knowledge passed to others, who added their own observations, their own careful experiments with dosages and preparations. Centuries later, a woman died from lead poisoning caused by her face powder, but someone noticed the connection between her symptoms and her beauty routine. That observation, shared and discussed, became part of humanity's growing understanding of toxic substances and their effects on human health. A soldier survived a battlefield amputation performed by a barber surgeon whose steady hands and quick work gave him a chance at life. That soldier's survival validated techniques that saved other soldiers, creating a body of knowledge about trauma care that eventually evolved into modern emergency medicine. Each tragedy taught a lesson. Each success pointed toward better methods. Each brave individual who questioned established wisdom, whether they were ultimately right or wrong, contributed to the slow but steady accumulation of knowledge that protects you today. The mistakes weren't failures. They were tuition payments in humanity's education about health and healing. The people who died from bloodletting, from toxic medicines, from contaminated water, didn't die in vain if their deaths taught lessons that prevented future deaths. They became involuntary teachers in the great school of human experience. Your safety tonight is built on their sacrifice. Your ability to trust in medical care, to drink clean water, to live in an environment largely free from toxic threats. All of this was purchased with their pain, their confusion, their gradual discovery of how the world really works. But they weren't passive victims of ignorance. They were active seekers, always looking for better ways to heal, to help, to solve the endless puzzle of human suffering. The physician mixing his elaborate potions, the surgeon heating his blade, the mother applying what she believed was healing salve to her child's wound. All of them were participating in humanity's long experiment with care and healing. Even when they were wrong, they were motivated by love. Love for their patients, love for their families, love for the idea that suffering could be reduced and healing could be achieved. That love never changed, even as knowledge evolved. The heart of healing remained constant while the methods transformed completely. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress, supported by more than just springs and fabric. You're supported by centuries of human effort, by the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals who refuse to accept suffering as inevitable. The pillow beneath your head contains no toxic stuffing. The walls around you harbor no arsenic-laden papers. The air you breathe has been filtered by understanding, purified by knowledge, made safe by the hard-won insights of generations. Even the simple act of lying in a clean bed reflects discoveries that once seemed impossible. The cotton was grown without toxic pesticides that people didn't yet know were dangerous. The dyes used in your sheets were tested for safety by regulations that exist because people learned, sometimes at terrible cost, which chemicals could harm human skin. The darkness around you isn't threatening, it's peaceful. You don't need to fear invisible vapors or mysterious miasmas. You don't need pomanders filled with spices or masks stuffed with herbs. The air is simply air, and it's safe to breathe deeply, to let it fill your lungs without worry or vigilance. Your body can relax completely because it doesn't need to be on guard against invisible enemies you can't understand or fight. The constant anxiety that characterized daily life for your ancestors, the perpetual awareness that any meal might be contaminated, any breath might carry disease, any remedy might be worse than the illness, has been replaced by a fundamental trust in your environment. This trust isn't naivety, it's the fruit of knowledge. It's been earned through centuries of careful observation, rigorous testing, and gradual understanding of how the world actually works. You can afford to let your guard down because others have spent their lives building the defenses that now protect you. The clock on your wall ticks with the same rhythm that has marked human time for generations. But the meaning of that time has changed. For people in our stories, time was often measured in survival. How long until the fever breaks? How long until the wound heals? How long until we know if the treatment is working or killing? For you, time is measured in comfort, in rest, in the luxury of sleep without fear. You can surrender to unconsciousness without worrying that you might not wake up, that some invisible threat might claim you while you're defenseless. Your breath slows naturally, matching the ancient rhythm of human rest, but without the vigilance that once accompanied sleep. You don't need to listen for signs of danger. Don't need to maintain awareness of your surroundings. The safety that surrounds you is so complete, so reliable, that you can afford the ultimate luxury, complete, trusting abandonment to sleep. Now then, it's truly time to rest. Let all thoughts drift away. Let your body sink deeper, deeper still, into the gentle embrace of your bed. Feel the weight of your body, a comfortable, pleasant heaviness. Feel your breathing slow down, becoming as regular as gentle waves lapping against a peaceful shore. The stories are finished now. Darkness has become your friend, a soft blanket wrapping around you. There's nothing left to do, nowhere left to go. Just here, now, in this perfect peace. Thank you for traveling with me through tonight's journey. May you have the deepest sleep and the most beautiful dreams. Sleep well. The final silence settles around you like snow, soft and complete. In this quiet, you can hear the echo of all the stories we've shared, not as disturbances to your peace, but as lullabies sung by history itself. Each tale of struggle and discovery becomes a note in the symphony of human progress that plays you gently towards sleep. Your eyelids are heavy now, weighted with the satisfaction of understanding, with the comfort of knowledge, with the deep contentment that comes from seeing how far humanity has traveled from darkness toward light. The journey wasn't quick or easy, but it was inevitable, driven by the irrepressible human desire to understand, to heal, to make tomorrow safer than today. Let your breathing become the only sound in your personal universe, a rhythm as old as life itself, as reliable as the turning of the earth. Each breath connects you to every human who has ever lived, who has ever hoped for healing, who has ever worked to make the world a little bit better for those who would come after. The weight of your body in this bed, the softness of these sheets, the purity of this air, all of it is a love letter from the past, written in the language of accumulated wisdom, delivered to you across the centuries by people who never knew your name but worked to make your life possible. Sleep now in the peace they purchased for you. Dream in the safety they constructed. Rest in the knowledge that you are the living answer to their prayers, the fulfillment of their hopes, the proof that their struggles were not in vain. The last thought before dreams take you might be the simplest and most profound. How grateful we can be, how very grateful, for the privilege of living not in the darkness of ignorance, but in the gentle light of understanding that others lit for us at such great cost, with such perfect love.